They said her name like a rumor. He said it like a verdict. The room is a fuse, the silence the match, and when the doors part, the air tastes like varnish and old verdicts. Eyes lift, as if tugged by wire. Pens halt mid-scratch, and the scrape of one chair sounds like metal on bone. She walks as if weightless, and carrying a mountain, past flags that do not blink, and faces that will not forget. The walls hold 1,000 whispers, but today they hold their breath. A man rises in polished blue cloth and battlefield posture, weather cut into his face by years she counted in sleepless nights. He lifts his palm, not to swear, but to salute. His voice does not break. The room does. The name lands like a fall from a high place, like a door kicked at midnight, like the end of pretending. The word they gave her returns to claim its debt. The Reaper. The word hangs in the wood grain and headlines stitched into the murmurs that follow her, like cigarette smoke. Strangers have built a scaffolding of stories around a silhouette they have not earned, painting monster and martyr with the same careless brush. She feels the tightness of old nights at the edge of sleep, the weight that never sat in a rucksack, the ache of being seen as a myth, because it is easier than seeing a person. Every lens wants the blood, never the breath that didn't end. The past does not arrive. It leaks under doors, rides on wrists, hides in courtroom gloss. She walks as if the floor might tilt, as if the old ground might give way, as if a name could become a trapdoor. Somewhere a clock is ticking, counting down to the moment when truth and loyalty stop pretending they are friends. In the anteroom, the air is thinner, like altitude in a place with no mountains. The table between them is blank, a tiny battlefield cleared of anything that could distract from the single path ahead. Counsel's voice comes quiet and precise, slicing options into consequences, each word a pressure point she already knows. There is a cost for carrying what others drop. There is a price for saying what was said in the dark, with the radio crackling and the compass where the heart should be. She studies the door as if it leads to weather she cannot yet name. Her pulse is steady in the wrist, the old discipline holding like a knot. Truth is not a weapon here. It is a light that burns what it touches. She nods once, accepting the heat. When the gavel lifts, the room remembers its spine. Rules march in and take their seats, and the ritual of order settles like dust. The judge's voice carries iron hidden in velvet, spelling the boundaries of what will be seen and what will stay buried. Objections edge in like weather fronts, forecasts written in case law and fragile ego. A screen hums awake, a rectangle promising truth in pixels, and for a breath, the room believes in evidence the way children believe in maps. Then a word about admissibility, a hint of missing time, the suggestion of a gap where something vital once lived. She feels the old patience wrap her ribs, the training that taught her to breathe for the second after the shot, the part where consequences arrive. Somewhere, a missing minute is already shouting. The first fracture arrives without warning. A scent of cold earth and cordite slipping under the door of memory. Time folds and the room gives way to a ridgeline, where night is a blade held flat against the sky. Breath becomes strategy. Heartbeat a metronome she learned to trust when everything else lied. A shape resolves where a shot would be easy and wrong. She counts to clarity, counting ways not to become the story others crave. The mountain holds its silence. She answers with her own. The withheld trigger is a vow, an invisible act, a ledger entry no one will ever see. Back in the courtroom, the present flickers, and she returns carrying the cost of that quiet. The room smells like dry canvas and pencil shavings, the kind of air that turns voices into instruments of measurement. A satellite print sprawls across the table. Rivers of ink passing for trails that were never made for boots. A drone still shows a doorway that looks honest, a courtyard that looks empty, a clock in the corner that keeps time like a gambler keeps promises. The briefing flows with the tidy certainty of arrows and grids, but certainty tastes brittle when memory adds its own contours. Questions arrive in a careful cadence, and answers come trimmed to fit the slide. Outside, the generator coughs and catches, a metronome for choices that will outlive the night. The plan is a map of confidence. The ground will be a report card written in dust. She studies the routes, the fallback points, the names of streets no one will speak, and feels the subtle slant of information leaning the wrong way. The ridge greets them with a hard wind and the kind of quiet that lives between a heartbeat and a decision. Darkness lies thin over the terraces, a veil that fools the restless and spares the patient. A small figure steps into the geometry of the scope. The frame turns intimate and dangerous, and the world shrinks to breath, counted against cold metal. The rules that matter are older than any manual, and they arrive without fanfare. A memory of kindness that once interrupted a different night. A whisper of gravel, a murmur on the net, a warning to wait for the picture to widen. The crosshairs soften as the child lifts a bucket and vanishes behind a wall. And relief falls like rain on a roof you feared would not hold. The moment passes without witnesses, yet it brands the hour with a quiet that will return when truth needs a language. The base is a factory for routine that keeps fear in a small locker, at least until the siren calls it back. Between missions, time moves sideways. Laughter arrives in scraps that never make the news. Someone swears the last round from each magazine is blessed. Someone else rubs a coin until the ridges blur. A line from an old song wanders across the gravel, drifts past the chapel door, and dissolves into generator hum. She files the bolt with a cloth until the action whispers, then carves 10 small initials into the underside of the stock, a list of breaths she refused to let go. Coffee cools faster than conversation. Boots dangle from a cot like tired punctuation. For a few minutes, the war is only wind in the antenna wires and the clack of a deck of cards, and that small mercy warms the hands better than the tin cup. Evening folds around the safe house with the softness that follows danger, and conversation takes off its boots at the threshold. A kettle clicks and releases a curl of steam that smells of cardamom and memory. The man who guides their words across 2 languages pours with both hands, as if ceremony could make honesty easier to carry. He tells a story about rain that turned a road into a river, and how a stranger pulled a truck clear with a rope and a promise. Each detail lands like a stone on a scale that has been tipped too long. She hears herself pledge to return with bandages for a village clinic that does more with thread and courage than any shipment can replace. The promise feels light when spoken, and heavier with each swallow of tea, and in that weight she recognizes a future that has already begun closing its fist. The footage plays like a memory that wants to cooperate but cannot shake the fever. Angles stack into a story that almost holds. A hallway here, a doorway there, a blur that might be mercy, or might be motion. The timestamps march in clean numerals until they stumble, 1 second stepping over another and landing on the wrong side of a breath. Voices pop and hiss in the mix, a syllable cut short, a command trimmed to fit a version that flatters the outcome. The room leans into the glow of the screen as if leaning could anchor time, as if faith could mend a seam that has already frayed. Somewhere between a turn and a shout, the feed sighs and returns with fresh confidence, and none of it explains the taste of copper at the back of the throat that comes when a story forgets to include the part that hurts. The witness chair feels like a lookout post that was never meant for sleep, wooden edges turning posture into duty, while the room arranges itself into ranks. Lines of authority are drawn with clipped questions and careful answers, arrows marching from field to desk to signature. A diagram appears on the screen like a family tree that forgot to love anyone. Boxes connected by thin veins of power, each square a name that once crackled through a headset in the dark. She speaks with measured cadence that refuses theater, shaping the night into a sequence the law can carry. Titles sound larger than the people who wore them, yet weight leaks through the seams in every pause. Somewhere behind the decorum lives the hour when a single word could move bodies across yards of danger, and the room learns how fragile command feels when it arrives as a voice and leaves as a consequence. The diagram fades and the wall becomes night again. Stone steps, a doorway breathing cold, the sour electricity of weather that means trouble. The laser winks on and paints a dot that pretends to be certainty, then drifts as the wind edits decisions. Time is a coin that gets spent without consent, and in this hour someone tilted the clock. Small hands moved while attention chased noise. The world shrinks to breath and angle, and the soft insistence of a radio asking for what it already wants. She counts, resets, counts again, refuses to let the dot turn into an answer that future mouths will praise because it was simple. The courtyard holds its secrets like a tongue behind teeth, and the second that goes missing will later return as a hole big enough to fall through. She keeps the shot inside the chamber and lets the doubt work. Memory lurches forward to the smell of copper and bleach and the peculiar quiet that follows explosions. A hush crowded with unfinished sentences. The floor is a collage of footprints and torn gauze, and light strobes from somewhere unkind, cutting the world into frames that never ask permission. Hands work without deciding to. Tourniquet, gauze, pressure, breath counted against panic. The kind of arithmetic that keeps stories from ending. A voice keeps saying almost there, and another voice keeps asking where, and between them lies a person who will make it, because someone refuses to let the hour close. Testimony turns to this room without a roof, and the jurors learn how mercy can look like blood under fingernails. The law wants names and minutes. The heart remembers pulses, how they slow, how they stutter, how a hand refuses to lift until rhythm returns. The story bends toward a quieter ledger, the one no report bothers to tally, where a nickname was born from nights that refused to let the leaving be final. It started small, a joke whispered over tin coffee, then it stuck because evidence held. Bodies carried to the med tent before the clock could steal them. Breath coaxed back with stubborn patience. A presence that arrived when everybody else ran out of answers. The room hears how a call sign often grows from bravado, yet this one grew from refusal. From staying with the almost gone until almost turned into still here. There is a hush that feels different from fear, a listening that respects the way courage can be quiet. She neither embraces nor rejects the work. She lets it stand, and in that stillness it changes shape. No longer a threat, not yet a banner. Simply a record. Back in the wood and glass, the words sharpen into weapons that wear suits. A question arrives with a smile that does not reach the eyes, and the hour tilts toward a version of events where patience becomes negligence and restraint becomes danger. She keeps her voice even, refuses the bait, describes choices as the arithmetic of risk rather than the theater of bravado. The room feels the tug of two magnets, one pulling toward a story that flatters simple appetites, the other toward a truth that asks for work. Murmurs gather and die. The judge's gaze steadies the air. She explains how a second withheld can save a life you will never meet, how mercy can look like hesitation to those who have never been measured by wind and angle and the weight of a heartbeat. The smile fades. The record gains a spine. The screen wakes, and the room leans forward as if a tide has shifted. Pixels arrange themselves into a hallway with a breath that sounds like a storm trapped in a jar. The numbers in the corner tick with the confidence of a metronome that has never been wrong. Then the rhythm trips and lands in silence. A clean seam runs through time where there should be grit. The voice that guided the night returns with a shine it did not have when fear was loud. She studies the edges of the picture the way she learned to read wind, looking for the thing that does not belong, the glare that should not be there, the shadow that forgot its source. The law asks for clarity, and gets a riddle carved into light. A minute has been removed with tidy hands, and what remains wears a smile that feels borrowed. The room understands a theft has taken place, and the absence begins to speak. Questions arrive like taps on glass, delicate and relentless, pointing to seconds that refuse to agree with themselves. The polished story begins to shed its shine, a thread pulling free at the hem, where no one expected weakness. He speaks with the cadence of drilled certainty and watches it wobble when the numbers line up against his memory. The room listens for the click that proves alignment and hears instead the soft scrape of something moved when no one was looking. She does not let her eyes leave the face that once commanded storms. The chart of time becomes a map of pressure points. At each one, the narrative blinks and resets. It is not the volume of a voice that gives it weight. It is the way it holds when the light turns forensic. Here, the light does not flatter. It reveals. And in the revealing, it asks for a different courage. The spotter takes the chair and brings the night with him, not with words at first, but with the way his shoulders remember weight. He reaches for confidence and finds the thin fabric of a month with too little sleep. Loyalty steps onto the rail beside honesty, and both try to balance without falling. The questions are gentle until they are not, and somewhere between them he hears the echo of a count that would not settle. He admits a correction that never made it over the air, a drift that looked small, and later grew teeth. He wants to serve the past and protect the living. The room lets him try and then listens to the crack appear at the edge of his voice. His stare finds the tabletop and holds on. The oath does not feel like a trap. It feels like a promise that finally asked to be kept. The mirror in the restroom gives nothing away. Fluorescent light hums like a wire stretched too tight, and the stall door shuts with the soft certainty of a safe. She braces her palms on porcelain that holds the chill of a winter morning and lets breath come in measured counts that used to steady a rifle and now try to steady a life. The sound of the courthouse fades to a distant tie. Memory is louder here, a narrow hallway. The taste of metal laughter cannot wash away. She waits for the shake to pass, and when it does not, she names it quietly and keeps breathing. The floor tile blurs and resolves. The old instruction returns, simple and stubborn. On the second after the impact, she watches the gold thread of resolve reappear, thin and real, and follows it back to her feet. The hallway feels longer on the return, a corridor where light gathers like resolve, and the carpet remembers every step that brought her here. She thinks of the minute that vanished, and the voices that learned to live inside the gap. A choice waits at the threshold with the patience of a sentinel. Protect the story that kept a circle intact, or tell the one that might break it and leave everyone standing closer to the ground. She hears the promise made in a room that smelled of tea and dust, a pledge to bring more than force to a place that had already carried too much weight. The door to the court is not a gate to battle. It is a hinge that turns on whether a name can be made to mean mercy. She reaches for the handle and feels the shake fade. What remains is not fury. It is clarity. Questions sharpen into teeth and smile while they bite. The tone changes, courteous in shape and cruel in purpose, and the room feels the temperature drop even though the sun still squares itself across the windows. They press for numbers that make a headline sing, for adjectives that stain, for a frame that edits out the long seconds where nothing happened because choice held the line. She feels the old drill rise from the bones, breath counted into control, cadence kept in the pocket where panic cannot reach. Each answer refuses theater and chooses wait. They try to dress restraint as hunger, and still the logic stands, a bridge anchored in facts that will not move. The judge's gaze lifts, and the noise trims itself. The questions circle and return with fresh polish. She gives them the same daylight. When the bait grows brighter, she lets it drift away and leaves only the hook. The room folds and the night returns, a corridor humming with electricity and grit, the air full of stone dust and shouted syllables that mean stop before the wrong thing happens. Light strobes and turns distance into mistakes. A door swings on a hinge that squeals like warning, and the choice arrives in a flash that could end anything. Feet slide on powder. Breath finds the edge of control. A shadow takes the shape of a person who is not an enemy. The moment stretches thin enough to see through, thin enough to recognize a face that has poured tea and made language travel safely from mouth to mouth. He steps into the line where intent and motion tangle, arms wide, a barrier made of trust spent all at once. The sound that follows is not the one that haunts nightmares. It is the sound of restraint holding when fear tries to spend the last of your courage for you. The medic takes the oath again without moving his lips, and the room hears it in the way his hands remember pressure and release. He speaks of radio static like weather and of orders that arrive late or not at all. He talks about the calculus of bleeding and time, about how triage sometimes outranks the script, about the moment when a voice asked for clearance, and the net returned with silence that might as well have been approval if you needed it to be. He does not hide behind poetry. He gives the seconds names and shows where they lived, shows which ones were borrowed, which ones were stolen, which ones grew teeth after the fact. The questions try to unmake certainty by changing the angle of the light. He keeps to the center line. He says what never came across the air and what did, and the difference lands like a weight on the table. Motives arrive dressed as strategy and call themselves necessity. The narrative that once fit neatly inside a commendation begins to leak along the edges where truth keeps pressing. Questions turn from what to why and then to who benefits when the missing minute disappears. The answer wears a shine that could pass for professionalism if you do not look long. Careers have a gravity all their own, and sometimes they bend light. She listens to the careful phrasing, the way responsibility is distributed like coins across too many hands to weigh. The room hears ambition clearing its throat behind polite words. It feels the tilt of a story that chose survival in the fluorescent world over accountability in the dark one. The silence after the last question is thick. It tastes like varnish and something burned. No one is a villain in their own account. Still, numbers do not lie when someone stops moving them. Grief steps forward without raising its voice, and the room listens because it must. The testimony is simple. Not because the story is small, but because the truth has learned that plain words carry the farthest. She speaks about mornings that do not start, and a chair that stays empty, no matter how many times the sun tries again. She does not ask for punishment to pretend it is healing. She asks for the line between mistake and lie to be drawn where everyone can see it. The room breathes together for the first time in hours. The weight shifts from spectacle to meaning, from scoring points to counting costs. When she finishes, no one reaches for applause. They reach for steadiness. In the quiet that follows, the name that once felt like a blade begins to feel like a promise, a way to mark the lives that were not thrown away when fear asked for the easy answer. She lays the night out like a map, built from breath and memory, not from pride. Rooms return in measured order, doorways opening to the same cold air they carried before the shooting started, corners labeled by the way sound bent and dust moved. She speaks of the first breach and the pause that followed, of the corridor that narrowed judgment, of a lantern that made shadows behave like suspects. The sequence is a braid of voices, each one a coordinate that anchors the others. She marks the moment when restraint held, the second when a figure stepped between, the point where the net went quiet and time learned to lock. Her words remove the varnish and leave the grain. The room feels the geometry of choices, angles that spared lives, angles that did not. It is not a story of heroism. It is the inventory of a night that refuses to be simplified. Science takes the stand with a voice that sounds like calibration, and the glow from the screen turns the room into a lab. A waveform rolls and shows how gunshots carve their signatures into air, how echoes ladder across walls, how distance teaches pitch to change its name. A drone feed plays beside the audio, and the two begin to walk in step until they do not. The gap appears as a hush that should be thunder. Numbers prove what memory already carried. Frames are missing where consequence lies. She listens as the expert draws a line from pressure wave to muzzle report to the moment. Someone trimmed the truth and left the story dressed for inspection. There is no drama in the proof, only the solid weight of alignment. The absence is measured and entered. The silence is no longer empty. It is evidence with edges. The hallway swallows footsteps and returns them as the sound of decision. He waits where portraits keep watch, offers a half-smile that remembers authority, and begins with a tone that used to move mountains. He speaks of careers and timing, and how the world prefers clean edges to jagged mercy. He calls caution wisdom and calls omission stewardship, then lets a fragment of truth slip and hang between them like a wire that hums when plucked. The apology never arrives. The permission does. She hears what he will not say aloud, that the minute was taken because it refused to serve the story he needed. The old gravity tugs at her ribs, the instinct to salute what once kept her alive. She feels it and lets it pass. The distance between them is measured now not by rank, but by what each is willing to carry in full light. Authority returns to the bench with the solidity of stone, and the order lands with the weight of a door that was always meant to open. Sealed notes appear from a place colder than storage. Pages that once wore stamps like art. Hands past binders as if they contain weather. The script that pretended to be complete learns it was an outline. She watches the neat fonts give way to handwriting that admits to doubt and delay, to edits that walked past the truth and did not look down. The room discovers that secrecy is a currency with inflation. Every hidden line buys less than it promised. The judge does not raise her voice. She simply insists that light do its ancient work and leaves no corner unvisited. The sound of tabs flipping becomes a new kind of testimony. The pages turn and turn, and each one reduces the room's appetite for shortcuts. Names can be cages or doors. She chooses the door. When the question comes about what the word once meant, she lets the quiet arrive first and fills it with the truth she carried through the long nights. The call sign did not grow from a tally. It grew from refusal, from kneeling in dust until a pulse returned, from counting breaths for someone who had none to spare, from being the last to leave a room that still contained a chance. She grants the name its history and breaks its chain, returns it to the work that made it worth saying. The room does not cheer. It understands. The story has turned from spectacle to witness, from posture to practice. She takes a breath that is not a brace, and for the first time the weight across her shoulders changes shape. It does not vanish. It redistributes, and in that new balance, she stands taller. The room steadies around the weight of a last telling, the kind that does not seek sympathy or absolution, only a ledger that finally matches the night. Breath gathers and carries, a road of moments laid end to end. A chain of doors opened and not opened, of seconds held until they softened into safety. The questions arrive like measured steps on stone, and the answers move without ornament, building a bridge from what was feared to what was done. There is no pose left to strike, no armor worth wearing when the light is this clean. She names the silence that followed a trimmed order, the hush that served ambition more than lives, and in doing so releases a current that turns the room from spectacle into witness. The story completes its circuit, not triumphant. True. In the stillness after, the old name feels less like a verdict, and more like the echo of a promise kept. The verdict arrives the way weather does, first as a change in the air, and then as a sound that reorganizes distance. Words are read in a cadence that refuses drama, and yet each syllable lands with the clarity of rain on a roof after a long season of smoke. Liability is not a synonym for vengeance. It is a map that finally includes the missing road. Damages follow like measured footsteps, numbers that cannot purchase the lost but can mark the cost in a language power respects. A censure enters the record, and with it an end to the fiction that loyalty requires silence. The room absorbs this new shape of accountability. Some shoulders drop, others stiffen, and somewhere in the gallery, a prayer changes tense from please to thank you for seeing. The future does not leap. It turns deliberately toward a straighter horizon. When the bench is empty, the quiet left behind feels less like absence, and more like a room trying on honesty. He remains seated, as if rank could hold a chair in place, hands folded, eyes on the grain of wood that has heard too many names. The mask that once lived on posture loosens, and the face beneath shows the arithmetic of choices made for a future he thought he needed. Respect does not vanish. It learns a different address, one where admiration can coexist with a refusal to follow. He lifts his gaze, and for a breath the past stands between two people who once moved together through weather thicker than law. There is no salute. There is a nod that admits a cost finally paid in the open. He is smaller now, not because defeat has arrived, but because truth has returned everything else to scale. Dusk folds over the range like a blanket held just above the skin, warm at the edges, cool at the core. Targets stand out there in a field that has no enemies, only distances that tell the truth about wind and time. The rifle on the bench is the same weight it has always been, yet the carry feels altered, as if a hidden pocket had been emptied. She settles into the old posture, finds the breath, counts the beat, and lets the trigger break like a sentence finishing itself. The sound is smaller than the stories it once fed. A paper circle darkens. Another breath, another finish. No scoreboard, no tally, only repetition turning into prayer. Night rides in on the backs of crickets. The horizon holds. She does not aim at ghosts. She writes her name in the air with steadiness and lets it drift away, unclaimed by fear. Morning leans against the memorial wall and waits without hurrying. Names rise in columns that look like rivers frozen mid-song. She stands close enough to see the scratches that weather leaves even on stone meant to last longer than sorrow. From her pocket comes a small folded slip, the kind you carry too long because you cannot risk it getting lost. The note is only a sentence, plain as a field at first light, addressed to the ones who taught her that staying is a shape of courage. She tucks it beneath a flower already beginning to bow and adds a new name under her own. A vow to measure worth by lives held, not taken. Wind moves through leaves with the sound of brushed canvas. Somewhere behind her, a city begins its day. She lets the quiet finish speaking, then walks away lighter by the weight she finally set down.